Ready to dive into this whole venture capital world.
Yeah, let's do it.
We're talking about taking, like, huge risks and having, like, the guts to build Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
We're going deep into Sebastian Mallaby's book, NW, The Power Law.
Oh.
It's like a wild ride, honestly.
I think what always gets me is just how different things were before Silicon Valley, you know?
Oh, totally.
Like, imagine trying to get money for some new tech thing back then.
It'd be impossible.
Almost. Investors were so traditional, if it didn't fit their mold, forget it.
It's like they were afraid of anything new. Mallaby tells this story about Tom Davis the day he moves into his office. He gets this call
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
about, like, funding a computer venture. Yeah. Total chance, but it changed the game.
That's venture capital for you, right?
Ah.
Spotting what others miss. That call, it wasn't just luck, it showed what was missing.
Right, like the old way wasn't enough anymore.
Exactly. They needed a new way to fund these risky tech ideas, and that's where these new investors came in.
And that's where Arthur Rock comes in. Not an engineer himself.
But he got them.
Yeah. He understood what made them tick, you know?
Oh, yeah. He saw their passion when everyone else just saw dollar signs.
And that's huge, because those ideas, they were the key.
It's like Rock knew the old rules didn't apply to this new stuff. Remember intellectual book value?
Oh, right. He came up with that.
Yeah, he saw a company's ideas, and the people behind them, those were their real assets.
So instead of looking at, like, are they making money now? It was more like,
What could they become?
yeah.
Yeah.
Like he threw out the old rule book and said, we're making a new one for this new world.
Exactly. And it was all about the engineers. Rock truly believed that if they had ownership, a real piece of the pie, they'd do amazing things.
And that's what led to Fairchild Semiconductor, right?
That's right, one of the granddaddies of Silicon
Yeah.
Valley.
But Fairchild wasn't just about tech. It was a total culture clash.
Oh, absolutely. You had these straight-laced East Coast investors up against these free-spirited West Coast engineers.
Like oil and water, almost.
In a way. On one side, you have these brilliant minds who want to push the limits. And then you have these investors who don't always get the tech, trying to control everything.
Right, it's that classic tension.
Rock understood that to get the best out of the engineers, they needed freedom.
Yeah.
Ownership was key.
And this wasn't just talk for him either. Mallaby talks about how after Fairchild gets bought, the engineers are frustrated,
Yeah.
and Rock actually tells them to go out on their own.
Really?
He even hooks them up with people like Henry Singleton over at Teledyne,
Wow.
who ends up backing some of their ventures. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is.
That's incredible. He wasn't just writing checks. He was shaping Silicon Valley behind the scenes.
More like a mentor than just an investor.
Yeah. But this hands-on style, it didn't stop with Rock.
Yeah.
Then you have Don Valentine at Sequoia and Tom Perkins at Kleiner Perkins.
Oh yeah, they took it to a whole new level.
These guys were forces of nature, not just investors.
Right, like Valentine, with his, I don't know, tough love approach and that whole Fairchild Semiconductor Business School line, he wasn't messing around.
He was intense, but he got it. Valentine knew that investing in a company was investing in its people.
But that must have been tough on some founders, right? Having this industry giant looking over your shoulder all the time.
I'm sure it was a mixed bag. Some people thrive under that pressure, some don't. But you can't argue with the results. Valentine's hands-on style helped companies like Cisco make it through those tough early years.
Yeah, and then there's Tom Perkins, who Mallaby portrays as this brilliant strategist, especially in the world of biotech, which is so risky.
Definitely.
Look at gene tech, for example. They had this revolutionary idea, but practically nothing else. No labs, no scientists, just this huge vision.
Unikick is such a great example of how Perkins operated.
Right.
He realized that the old way of starting a company wouldn't work for them. They couldn't waste time and money building labs when the science itself was so new.
So what did he do?
He got creative. Instead of building a company from scratch, he made a virtual one.
A virtual company? What does that even mean?
He contracted out the research and focused on strategy and intellectual property.
Wow. So instead of getting bogged down in the day-to-day, he was thinking bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's what made him so successful.
Yeah.
It was really smart, actually.
It's like, talk about shaking things up. But then he does something even crazier. He takes Gentech public when they're like barely making any money.
Yeah, but see, Perkins got it. He understood that these new biotech companies, they didn't fit the old financial rules.
So taking them public early, that was a way to like challenge the system.
Exactly. It showed that investors were willing to back potential even with all the unknowns.
So it's like he didn't just build a company, He changed how the whole game was played.
Right, he set this precedent. And then comes another huge shift. Think personal computers, networking, the internet. That's when this whole network effect thing really takes off.
Right, it's not just about the tech itself anymore. It's how it connects everything and everyone.
Exactly. And Mallaby tells this great story about Bob Metcalf.
Oh yeah, the Ethernet guy.
Right. So he quits his job at Xerox PR, super prestigious place, with like nothing but an idea.
And the belief that someone would fund it.
And that's the network effect right there.
Yeah.
By that point, the venture capital world was like, if you've got a killer idea in a hot field, we'll back you.
It's like they were just waiting for the next big thing.
Exactly. Speaking of which, remember that whole battle between Cisco and 3Com?
Oh yeah, those two are giants. Networking was huge.
And that's a perfect example of how these venture capitalists, like Don Valentine, they were players, not just money men. They helped shape those company strategies, dealt with all the technical stuff.
They were in the trenches, basically.
Totally. And remember how Valentine had to step in and like play referee at Cisco? Mallaby describes it so well. He was a total tough love mentor.
Yeah, he got things done. It's like they weren't just investing money, they were investing time, energy. They were all in.
And then, just as the internet was going mainstream, bam, the dot-com bubble. Suddenly everyone's starting a company and investors are throwing money around like crazy.
It was like the Wild West out there.
Totally. Mallaby captures this perfectly when he talks about Yahoo. Imagine pitching a company where the product is free and you're relying on ads.
It sounds so crazy now, but back then,
It was revolutionary. And it worked for a while, but of course, what goes up?
crashes down, the bubble bursts, and the venture capital world is never the same.
Exactly. The dot-com bust was a wake-up call. It wiped out so many startups. Investors lost tons of money and became way more cautious. But from those ashes, a new kind of investor emerged, the super angels.
These were like individuals, often entrepreneurs themselves, right?
Exactly. They had made their own fortunes and were willing to bet on these new ideas, often with smaller amounts, but way faster than the big firms.
They were less worried about all the formalities and more about backing the right people with the right vision.
That's right. They trusted their gut. Remember that story about Sergey Brin and Larry Page pitching Google?
Yeah.
They pitched to Andy Bechtolsheim, legendary angel investor, and he's so blown away, he writes them a check for $100,000 on the spot. No business plan, nothing.
Wow. That's incredible.
That's the super angel mentality. Gut instinct, technical know-how, and a willingness to bet big on something completely new. And with Google, well, we all know how that turned out.
Talk about a good investment. But Google's rise wasn't just about the tech itself. It was about how much power shifted from investors to founders.
Definitely. These new entrepreneurs, they were different. They knew their worth. They'd seen what happened when investors had too much control.
I wanted to be in the driver's seat.
Exactly, and they found ways to do it. Mallaby talks about how Google deciding to use those dual-class shares, that really shook things up.
Yeah, that was a big deal. It was like they were saying, we're grateful for the cash, but we're calling the shots.
It was a power move. Dual-class shares. It gave them more control even after going public. They didn't want to be just another company where investors called all the shots.
And that idea that founders should be in control, it didn't end with Google, did it?
Not at all. Mallaby called it a youth revolt for a reason. You have guys like Mark Zuckerberg and then places like Y Combinator popping up.
Like the whole vibe changed, right?
Yeah.
Before, it was all about these older, more traditional investors calling the shots.
Totally. Now, you had these young, tech-savvy founders, and they knew what they were doing. Remember Zuckerberg pitching Facebook in his PJs?
Yeah. I was saying,
That just shows how much things had changed.
And Y Combinator, they were a big part of that too, right? They were more than just money. They were like a support system for these startups.
Yeah, they provided guidance, connections, the whole package. Paul Graham, one of the founders, he even said something like, "We're VC's soulless agents of Satan."
Wow. So they were really trying to shake things up.
Yeah, they wanted to democratize access to funding. Give everyone a shot, not just the guys with connections.
So you have this whole new generation of innovators, and they need more and more money to grow. That's where those huge growth equity funds come in, right?
Exactly. These software companies, they were growing like crazy, faster than anyone imagined. They needed tons of capital, and those traditional venture funds, they couldn't keep up.
So these growth equity funds, they're like the big leagues with massive amounts of money to invest.
Exactly. And Mallaby talks about Yuri Milner, this Russian billionaire. He puts a huge chunk of change into Facebook, like
Yeah.
way more than anyone thought it was worth at the time.
He saw something others didn't.
He did.
Yeah.
And that move, It put Facebook on the map. It wasn't just a Silicon Valley thing anymore. It was global.
Right, like a global game changer.
Uh,
And that brings us to the last part of the book, Uber, which is, well,
a wild ride.
to say the least. Uber's got it all, massive growth, controversy, you name it. It shows both the amazing things and the potential problems with this new tech world.
Mallaby doesn't sugarcoat anything. Uber was intense. He talks about Bill Gurley, one of the big investors, having to deal with all the drama, the toxic culture, trying to keep things from falling apart.
It's a good reminder that venture capital isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, it's about people.
Absolutely. And those people have a huge responsibility. They're not just building companies, they're changing the world.
So after this deep dive into the power law, what are the big takeaways? What should we be thinking about?
I think Mallaby wants us to see both sides. Venture capital can do incredible things, drive innovation, create jobs, but we can't ignore the downsides. We need to ask the tough questions.
Like, are we doing enough to make this industry more inclusive, more diverse?
Right, and are we building companies that are not just profitable, but also ethical, sustainable? These are things we all need to think about.
It's about making sure the future benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Exactly. And Mallaby reminds us that just because things have always been a certain way doesn't mean they have to stay that way. We can change things, make the system better.
That's a great message to end on. It's been a fascinating deep dive into venture capital. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We hope you learned something new today, and we'll see you next time.